these are the rantings of people who ought to be locked up in a psychiatric institution. But the problem is they really believe their own rhetoric. And so they believe that there will be some miracle from God, some intervention from the other world that will make all this possible for them without understanding the needs of, as you point out, how do you control that kind of territory with all of those kinds of people when you're only a nation of 7 million people, tops? And there probably is decline from that with people heading for the Axis, trying to get out of Israel. So it's madness, but it's important that people understand this is what they believe. Because the narrative we get here in the United States is that, Israel's a civilized country, and these uncivilized terrorist nations are threatening Israel. And yet, I haven't heard, those other nations have talked about getting rid of Israel. Yes, some of them, because they recognize what a threat Israel is, because Israel's talking about eliminating all of them. So maybe the old saying, two wrongs don't make a right. You've got wrong on both sides. But what's going on right now is Israel is trying to expand the war, get the United States involved, and pursue its dream of taking control of Lebanon, Jordan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia.
Larry Johnson takes a critical view of Israel's strategy, calling it not only irrational, but dangerously detached from reality. He likens the ambitions of the Israeli government to the kind of madness that would typically require psychiatric intervention. He's emphatic that these are not simply rhetorical exaggerations. Israel's leadership genuinely believes that, somehow, some miraculous intervention will secure their long-term dominance over the region. But Johnson is quick to point out that this approach ignores the immense human and logistical challenges involved in trying to control hostile territories. This is especially pronounced as Israel, a nation of around 7 million people, faces rising regional animosity and increasingly formidable opposition from its neighbors and rivals. In Gaza, the scale of devastation is staggering. The relentless bombardment has resulted in the deaths of over 40,000 civilians. Gaza has been reduced to ruins, and Johnson points out that this isn't a localized incident, but rather a stark example of Israel's broader intentions and disregard for human cost. Beyond Gaza, Israel has targeted Hezbollah in Lebanon, intensifying hostilities with one of Iran's most steadfast allies. These moves have inflamed the entire region, and Israel now finds itself facing not just Gaza, but a network of powerful and emboldened adversaries who are determined to push back. Iran's influence and military capabilities have evolved significantly, and Johnson emphasizes how Israel's leaders underestimate the resilience and strength of Iran and its regional allies. In the face of recent escalations, Iran has demonstrated its robust defense capabilities, successfully intercepting the majority of retaliatory missiles from Israel aimed at key Iranian military facilities. This successful defense underscores Iran's preparedness and serves as a powerful signal to both Israel and the wider region. Iran is not only capable of defending its own territory, but is also well-positioned to aid its allies in Lebanon, Syria, and beyond. Iran's network of alliances includes not just Hezbollah in Lebanon but extends into Iraq, Syria, and Yemen, creating a formidable axis of resistance. Hezbollah alone, with its substantial missile arsenal along Israel's northern border, represents a significant challenge. The group is not only deeply entrenched but is also highly trained and experienced, ready to retaliate if Israel escalates further. Johnson argues that Israeli leaders are ignoring the profound risks posed by Hezbollah's capabilities, not realizing that an assault on Iran or Lebanon could draw Israel into a multi-front conflict with little room for strategic retreat. Johnson critiques the Israeli government's ultimate ambition, which he describes as an expansionist dream of exerting control over territories far beyond Gaza and Lebanon. This dream, in Johnson's view, has Israel actively working to provoke the United States into further involvement, aiming to expand the conflict scope with the goal of consolidating influence over neighboring countries such as Jordan, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia. Israel sees Iran as the primary obstacle to this plan, and Johnson suggests that the ultimate objective is not only the destabilization of Iran, but also the elimination of its influence throughout the Middle East. But Johnson warns that this ambition is unrealistic and ultimately self-destructive. Iran's influence in the region isn't limited to direct military power. It has fostered alliances and proxy groups with deep-rooted support in Lebanon, Syria, and Iraq. This vast network makes it almost impossible for Israel to weaken Iran without facing severe repercussions on multiple fronts. Johnson stresses that Israeli leaders, by dismissing the strength of these alliances, are making a grave strategic miscalculation. Iran and its proxies are not only prepared for direct confrontation, but are also committed to defending their positions across the Middle East. Johnson draws attention to how U.S. media consistently portrays Israel as the civilized nation surrounded by uncivilized adversaries. This narrative, he argues, is dangerously misleading and contributes to a distorted understanding of the conflict. The reality, Johnson suggests, is that while Israel positions itself as a victim under siege, it's actually the aggressor in a campaign aimed at securing long-term regional dominance. Israel's rhetoric about eliminating threats is mirrored by its own actions, whether in Gaza, where civilian deaths have skyrocketed, or in Lebanon, where Hezbollah has become a target of frequent assaults. Iran's allies, by contrast, view Israel as the true existential threat. Johnson argues that this isn't just a matter of propaganda. The actions of Israel, from the devastation in Gaza to the strikes on Iranian-aligned forces, reinforce the perception that Israel is bent on eradicating any resistance to its hegemony. By ignoring this perspective, Johnson suggests, the West underestimates the resilience and commitment of Israel's adversaries. Iran's allies don't see themselves as aggressors. They view their actions as a necessary defense against an expansionist power. Johnson's analysis culminates in a stark warning. Israel's ambitions to dominate the Middle East are not just ambitious but reckless. Iran's strategic depth and military alliances give it a resilience that Israel hasn't fully accounted for. Iran is not isolated in this conflict. Its network of proxies and allies is ready to respond in kind if Israel continues its aggressive tactics. Johnson highlights that this isn't just a conflict over territory, it's a power struggle with existential stakes for Iran and its allies. Israel's escalation risks drawing it into a protracted, multi-front war that it cannot easily control or sustain. Unlike Israel, which is surrounded by increasingly hostile neighbors, Iran has built an extensive support network, with powerful allies capable of mobilizing quickly in response to aggression. The recent strikes on Hezbollah and Iran's missile defenses illustrate the precariousness of Israel's situation. Johnson emphasizes that these actions, intended to weaken Iran, may end up provoking a response that Israel is ill-prepared to handle. Johnson concludes that Israel's strategy is driven by a combination of overconfidence and underestimation of its adversaries, a lethal mix that could lead to a broader regional conflict. In his view, Israel is not only courting disaster for itself, but also risking further destabilization of the entire Middle East. According to Larry Johnson, it's irrational, that's what I'm saying. These are the rantings of people who should be in a psychiatric institution, but the problem is that they genuinely believe their own rhetoric. They're convinced there will be some divine intervention or miracle that will make all of this possible for them. They don't grasp the reality of their situation, as you pointed out. How do they control such a vast territory with such a diverse population when Israel is a nation of only about 7 million people? Likely even fewer, as many are trying to leave the country. It's sheer madness, but it's important to understand that they truly believe this. Here in the United States, we're fed a narrative that Israel is a civilized nation constantly threatened by uncivilized terrorist states. But when you look closer, you find that some of these neighboring countries do speak of removing Israel because they see Israel as a threat, given Israel's own talk of eliminating them. It's a case of two wrongs don't make a right, with both sides contributing to the conflict. However, right now, Israel is actively trying to escalate the situation, involving the United States, and pursuing its ambition to control Lebanon, Jordan, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia. Thanks for watching.